All right, and our last section is really short. Legacy of European imperialism. And we know that everywhere Europeans went, took over land, these are some of the poorest, least stable places in the world today. And oftentimes what happens, and I've showed this before when I talked about Southeast Asia, is that you'll have these big cities. Like this is a city called Lagos, Nigeria, and it looks like any big city anywhere, except for maybe the really cool, colorful roofs down here. But yeah, I mean, it looks like a big city because this is maybe somewhere where the Europeans went and they invested in a trade city. So this became a trade stop for Europeans, and the Europeans would build this area up, and they would turn it into a rich metropolitan city, similar to any around the world that you see in Europe or the US or Latin America or China or Asia or anywhere. But outside of the cities, a lot of these areas oftentimes end up living in abject poverty. I mean, we see this really strong in places like Kuala Lumpur, in places like Sao Paulo, Brazil, where the favelas, where the poor area of town is just beyond the kind of poverty you ever see in America. But in Africa, it's a little different because outside of the big cities, really what's kind of been left are the old school style villages. 60% of Africans don't live in cities, and if you're not going to live in a city, you oftentimes find yourself living like the relatives, like Africans lived for the past 1,000 years, without electricity, without the modern amenities of life and plumbing and clean water and all this stuff. And I don't want to come out and say that this isn't a good lifestyle. It's not like the favelas. It's not like these poor neighborhoods that are surrounding cities, and people are suffering. I have a great buddy who told me he's from the Philippines. He's from a rural area. His family had money. He says, "Man, some of the best days of my life were just going outside playing with sticks and rocks." And that like happiness doesn't always have to be money or city life or modernity. That some of the best choice of life can be had by people who don't live in the modern lifestyle. That I live in LA. We live in LA. It's there are parts of our country that are not as modern. We're in one of the most modern places in our country. So I don't want to try and say that this is a terrible lifestyle. These people are probably living very happy, and but Africa is different than Southeast Asia or Latin America in that way, where that the people outside of the cities aren't living like abject poverty favelas. I mean, there's some Asian countries where they're like taking our plastic, like mounds of 20 foot plastic just laying all over their countryside because they're getting paid to take our plastic. It's just but that's not the case here. They're living in villages, kind of traditional style, which maybe isn't the word. It's maybe a really fun life. I shouldn't impose my values or our values on others. We talk about how outside the cities, though, there are mining issues and gold mining issues and poaching issues of the nature. Africa has some of the most beautiful nature on earth. Africa's a Jebos and exotic wildlife that lives there. Nowhere else in the world still does. They were able to keep a certain level of nature that other parts of the world have not been able to. One thing about African village society, if we're going to get into it, is that women have oftentimes had more political power than anywhere else in the world. Traditional African village society might have put a woman equal to or even above a man. And now the Europeans come in and they're pushing their patriarchal societies where men kind of rule the show, and we can look deep into those and try and figure out like where they came from. Some might suggest religion, started the really patriarchal lifestyle. Others suggest it had to do with civilization and fighting and conquering, and the men kind of running the show because they were the warriors. I really don't know. But in these village societies, what we're going to find is a culture where oftentimes women had more political rights or more respect, or certainly more respect, right, than other parts of the world 1,000, 2,000 years ago. They were less patriarchal, maybe even matriarchal societies in Africa, and it still exists. And women are political leaders and societal leaders in Africa at a higher level than we see in most of the world. There's a lot of beauty in traditional African culture. And luckily, that hasn't completely been lost by European imperialism. And when we look at these poverty levels, I think that we tend to look at them and say, oh, that's so sad. But is it?